Good afternoon. We are coming to the closing session of this extraordinary event, designing a great narrative for the future. First, I want to thank all the 40-plus participants who have participated in this exercise. It was such an engaging discussion, and it will be very difficult for the panel really to distill all the interesting points which have been made. So consider what we are doing in the panel discussion as a kind of snapshot of what has happened during the last 48 hours. I want to thank also, at the beginning of this meeting, the government of Dubai for the extraordinary hospitality which we have been, I would say, living through the last 2 days. Now let me turn to this great narrative closing plenary, and we have 5 extraordinary people with us. I would like to start maybe with Frieke Heyman. I will introduce everybody when I ask the first question. And we want to do a little bit of ping pong, intellectual ping pong. So I ask everybody probably 3, 4, 5 questions, may interrupt and may ask for comments. So let's start. Frieke Heyman, you are the founding director of Quantum Delta, but you are known in your country as Miss Innovation, particularly intrigued by the new technologies. That's your life. So what are the big trends you foresee if we imagine we are in the transition to a completely new world? I think that was one of the conclusions. The world of tomorrow will be different from what we experience today. It will be a different world. Now, we do not know, we can imagine this new world, but we cannot, let's say, describe this new world in all the details. But we can see certain trends. So, Frieke, what trends do you see in shaping this new world?
Yes, well, looking at this new world, technology is going to play an amazing big role. There's, I think, 3 big technological trends that will drive this future. And one is digitalization. So if you look further ahead, you see quantum computing, the field I work in. It's a completely new paradigm for computing based on the laws of quantum physics, which can create an exponential growth of compute power, which can help solve problems, optimization problems, calculate new materials. And on the shorter term, of course, artificial intelligence, already here, but that will grow enormously. The metaverse, we talked a lot about that, getting to augmented and new virtual realities. And of course, the 4th digital revolution, the industrial revolution. So all these things will have a tremendous impact. And the second technological trend is everything that has to do with the energy transition. So looking far out, fusion power can become a reality finally in the mid-century. And before, things like green hydrogen, and also AI and digitalization will enable this transition, because we will need smart grids to improve our nets to deal with the emitted energy sources from solar and wind. So that's the second trend. And the third one I see is biology. So engineered biology, we're getting into the era of really engineering DNA and also personalized medicine. So I think these are the 3 major trends for the coming decades.
Frieke, one word, will it be a better world compared to today with many more opportunities, or?
Yes, I'm certain of that. If we know how to harness these technologies, then they will,
Yeah, I come back later.
Yeah.
But Dan Bissamoyo, you are well known also. I think 4 or 5 books have made it to the bestseller list of the New York Times. You are in a number of boards, but you are worldwide known as one of the foremost economists. So if you look at it from an economic point of view, what are the major trends which you see shaping our future?
Well, thank you very much. Let me start by making a broad statement regarding economics, and specifically economic growth, regardless of whether or not you have sort of concerns or skepticism around GDP or the definition of growth. My statement is the following, that our ability to create and sustain human progress is absolutely dependent on how well we are able to continue to create economic progress. Our ability to solve challenges like the environment, inequality, as well as geopolitical fissures is heavily dependent on our ability to create economic success. There are 3 key trends that I see regarding growth. First of all, even before the pandemic hit in earnest in 2020, economists and policymakers were already concerned about a slowdown in economic growth, not just in developed economies where we saw low growth rates around 1%, 1.2%, and even 0% in Germany in Q4 of 2019, but also in developing economies, the largest economies that have at least 50 million people, such as Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, etc. So problem number 1 is the path of economic growth. Even today, as we look ahead, if you look at the IMF and World Bank trackers, forecasts from 2022 onwards are that growth will be low and slowing. The second problem we have is that the toolkit that policymakers and economists have tended to look at, certainly over the last decades, which is around monetary policy, which is in interest rates, as well as fiscal policy, debts and deficits. Both of these policy innovations and tools have largely become impotent. With respect to monetary policy, we know that countries like Japan, but across Europe, interest rates are negative. And of course, broadly speaking, historically very low, with real consequences for the economy, and clearly worries with inflation now pointing to more challenges. Similarly, the concerns around debts and deficits, enormous debt burdens, both in public and private sector, as well as in households, continues to be a problem. The third problem we have around economic trends is really concerns around economic headwinds. Things like inequality, climate change, and what that might mean for headwinds, natural resource scarcity, the consequence potentially of technology to create a jobless underclass, etc. These are all issues that are creating headwinds to economic growth. And I might add, just to conclude here, that most of the challenges that we're facing are long-term structural challenges, but we do know that policymakers, by and large, tend to be very driven, certainly in competitive democratic states. Short-termism is an issue that is creating this gap and creating more challenges in the economic space.
If I may follow up with one question. There are certain people who say in order to solve the issue of those who are left behind and brings them on an acceptable level of welfare, we need to double GDP in the next 20 years, which means to have a growth rate of 3%. Are we able to achieve this growth rate?
Well, I'd like to be more sanguine. You're right. In order to double per capita incomes in one generation, about 25 years, you need to be growing by 3%. But that requires real structured, fundamental public policy initiatives, things like infrastructure build-out, education, healthcare. These are all long-term bets that very often short-term policymakers don't find appealing. So I think the one other thing I'll just say really quickly is that we have to move from a world where we are risk risk mitigating, constantly firefighting on emissions and concerns that are very important, and we have to continue to renew the thinking around upside investment, thinking about the future and progress for society writ large.
Let's turn to the social dimension, and who could better explain, let's say, what the situation and the trends are than you, Ilona Sabo de Cavallo. You are from Brazil. You are really living in the midst of social challenges. What trends do you see?
Thank you very much. I would just like to say my first point that I think all these dimensions are very interlinked, and COVID showed us the extent of our interdependence and our interconnection. So that side, I would say that the top trend that I see is this redefinition of the relationship between people, progress, and planet. And in which, in my view, we have to put people's dignity, also well-being, and the notion of regeneration at the center of all policies. And of course, it's not going to be easy. This will require a rethink of the whole global economics system. But if we don't do that, I think we need to stop treating climate change, inequalities, as uncounted externalities. These are not externalities. These can be accounted for. And I think we have to hold ourselves accountable in that sense. So I believe this shift has started, but of course needs to be accelerated. And because of where I come from, I see this need really, really clear in the day-to-day life of my work, be trying to protect the Amazon forest, be trying to reduce violence in urban centers. So I would say we have the tools, the knowledge, I would say the capital to just prioritize us people, but with this redefinition in mind.
Nairi Woods, you are the founding dean, I would say, of the Blavatnik School of Government of the University of Oxford, but you are involved as an advisor in many political processes. Now we listened to the economic, to the technological and social. Now the political dimension is key. How do you see, without, let's say, cooperation with governments and so on, we will not make progress? But what trends do you foresee?
Thanks, Klaus. I think it's exactly what you said. It's about cooperation. We know we can't contain COVID. We can't contain climate change without cooperation. And what does that mean? It means people trusting what other people will do in their own community and in the world. And to me, that means we've got to start making three very important kinds of investment. The first is investing in human capital. Actually, firms giving people the work conditions and the pay that make their lives worthwhile and that keep them coming to work, which many are not after COVID. It means governments giving tax incentives for investments in human beings, not just investments in machines. It means, I love the words of Her Excellency Minister Shama Al-Mazrui yesterday when she said, we need to make the path of least resistance the path for young people, which is towards being skilled, being positive contributors, being mentally healthy, and not just make the path of least resistance the path of unemployment, of unskilledness, and of addiction. I think that captures how we need to invest in human capital. But even more importantly, we have to invest in social capital. I think what we've all learned this last 2 years is that, I'm told, there's a good reason why Zoom does not bond people. You can do transactions on Zoom, but it doesn't bond you because you're not sharing the same immediate experience of sound, of smell, of being in the same room as some of us are here in Dubai. So think about the ways that communities used to share experience by going to school together, by going to the park together to play football, going to the public library, sharing, doing compulsory military service together. So many of those are gone. They've been fragmented. We live in societies, we call them societies, but actually people are separate. And we now need to invest in the social capital that brings communities together, that gives them space to come together and to learn to trust each other. And that, to me, Klaus, is where the new politics will be born of. It'll be born, we can see that people don't trust national politicians very much in many countries, but they do trust local government. In a survey I did of British business, it was very interesting because although they didn't think that local government was necessarily competent, they trusted it more as a partner in enterprise. And I think we're going to have to build politics from the local up. And that's just my final point would be that to cooperate on these big global problems, we really need to do what governments are there to do, why human beings even invented governments in the first place, to help us to take action. And that means ensuring our governments have a positive mindset to get things done, and the rest of society helping them to do that. It means using technology not as a magic bullet, but as a way to give real-time feedback constantly to the frontline government workers so they get better and more responsive at their job and are looked to society as people that get things done. And finally, on government, we need to come back to the local. We need to build trust at the local level and then let that trusted politics that actually does things for people percolate up into cooperation at the national level. So that's my scenario.
Thank you, Nairi. I think moving now from human capital to, let's say, our natural capital. And now, Koichi, you are professor at the Institute for Future Initiatives at the University of Tokyo in Japan, but you're also heading, as far as I know, a department for global commons. And you have, of course, great experience with the World Bank, with the IMF, with the government, and so on. So tell us about the trends, how you see them in the ecological area.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Where the world is heading from an ecological point of view has become clearer and clearer. Our current economic system is in the collision course with the natural system or the planetary Earth system, and we are destroying our very foundation of the prosperity the Earth system. We have pushed exceeded several of the important planetary boundaries, and the geologists are already informed us that we have entered into the new, where the first time in the human history we have started to alter the function of the Earth system. So in order for us humans to have a regenerative and flourishing future, we have to find a way to alter our way of doing business. Here on the important points are already made and the previous speakers. We have to find a way to appreciate not only economic capital, but natural capital and societal and human capital. And in order for us to do it, we have to completely change that the current economic system mentioned by Dan Lisa. So these two things, we have to find a way to create a better future in harmony with natural system.
Thank you. A world full of change. I would say a world in accelerated transformation, transformation of society, transformation of economies. But let me ask you a question. What do you see, and if you concentrate on the biggest opportunity which you see for humankind in this new world, what is the biggest opportunity which we have in this new world? We can paint all the let's say, problems and dangers and risks and so on. But what is the biggest opportunity? And let me start, Dambisa, with you.
Sure, thank you. I'm going to go back to my framing model and start off by saying, what do I know today that I believe will be true in 50 years from now? And I think there are three trends that I think are absolutely key and that will be opportunities for society. In no particular order, we have energy transition. once again, fueling and really driving change in society and in living standards is absolutely going to be dependent on an energy transition. Today, we're consuming 100 million barrels of energy every single day, and still there are about 1.5 billion people, or 15% of the world's population, that has no access to energy. That is unsustainable, and as we deal with climate change and climate action, energy transition is one thing. The second thing is technology, and Frika here will be much more placed to really get into details on where those opportunities are. But I will say that if you look at the past 20 years, we've seen enormous gains, financial gains, but societal gains from technology that have really emerged from things like networking or access to consumerism. I think there is a huge opportunity for gains to come to public goods delivery, education, healthcare, life sciences. These are things that will be really the promise of transformation for how we live and how we actually deliver on public goods and living standards, I think is huge. And then the third thing, which I've already alluded to, is really around the question of China. I mentioned this briefly in my opening remarks, but really our opportunity for better engagement in a country that has obviously shown itself able of transformation, given hundreds of years of mistakes, of policy errors, but yet being able to now be the second largest economy in GDP terms, with a real impact in terms of trade, foreign direct investment, also in terms of lending. I think China is not going away anytime soon, and our ability to bring a community for society where China plays an important role and is part and parcel of a global narrative, I think is absolutely crucial. And for a bonus one, I would just say investment in the youth. I think my colleagues here have already alluded to that. I do think that's a real opportunity, certainly in my home continent of Africa and around the emerging world, where there's a large population of young people.
Freike, what is for you the biggest opportunity?
The biggest opportunity is really to use these new technologies that are coming to make the world a better place. And I would like to react to the local side of things that was mentioned before. And I would like to use an analogy from quantum physics. So in the classical world, in the classical physics, the world is ruled by the laws of Newton. Action is reaction in a local environment, and that leads to a chain of reaction. In quantum physics, there's non-locality. So an electron or a photon here can be entangled with an electron or a photon there, and if you do something here, it instantaneously affects the state of the electron there. And I think that's a good metaphor to look at the challenge and also the opportunity we face. So on the one hand, we should go back to local. We should work on local communities, produce our energy locally, less travel, build the trust in our institution locally. And on the other hand, we're interconnected. That there is non-locality with the internet and with AI and everything. All the technology is there, and we should harness that for.
Naoko, what do you see as the biggest opportunity?
Yeah, if we are able to find a way to identify those natural capital, societal capital, human capital, which are currently not really adequately priced, then that if we were able to take into account that every decision making, economic decision making, we will really lead to a very regenerative, harmonious and flourishing society. So I see it's a big opportunity, and this society will be much less stressful from competing the finite resources. But in order for us to realize this opportunity, I think two things are very, very important. One, how to really value those global commons and how to put a price on the carbon, but also how to identify this natural capital and to measure and report consistently to the economic and decision making. But the second thing which I think is much more excited about is how we can create this platform, multi-stakeholder coalition platform with all relevant stakeholders together, with accountability and with resources and shared dreams, and where I think that we can learn much more from local community, because local community know how to create the social contract at the local level or community level. They know how to nurture and how to safeguard the local commons. Can we learn from those local community, trusted local community, to create a global platform to take care of global commons? And I think that then technology will really bring them together with a trusted basis and shared interest and shared accountability.
So responsibilization of every individual, which means life changes, possibly. But let me turn to Ilona. What do you see, if you take, for example, your people in Brazil and so on, what is the biggest opportunity?
See, above all, we have the opportunity to make better choices, and I think this is not small. And I would say the great priority we must have, the top one, is to bring the 4 billion unprotected people that were left behind. Without doing that, honestly, our societies will not thrive. So it's a big responsibility. And I think we are at a place that we can deliver on that. But of course, this will require not only a new kind of social contract, where we really take into consideration inclusivity, public health, reskilling for jobs. Also, when we think about the amount of girls that are not studying, climate justice, digital inclusion. So there are lots of things that we're going to have to bring to the table. And this will also require a major leap from where we are, the way we consume, the way we use our energy, but also the nature of our politics today. I would say that we have to be able to create the opportunity for dreaming, for social mobility again, because our societies have lost this capacity of allowing intergenerational, let's say, poverty to be overcome. So I would say, let's bring these people with us.
Which leads me to the comment, if I take the technological capabilities, and I'm thinking of the 3 billion people who do not yet, we say they don't have access to the internet, but actually practically everybody has a mobile phone and has already access to the internet. It's a question of functionality, affordability and functionality to provide for those people those services which they really need. So that's the adaptation we have to make. But I think the political dimension is key. Nairi, what do you see as the big opportunity?
I think the big opportunity is to do a reset, really quite a fundamental reset. I think, you know, the attempt to contain COVID has shown us that we have underestimated, probably for 3 decades or so, how important trust and belonging are within societies. That we're going to face all kinds of risks in the next decade, risks that we probably can't imagine today. And our best chance as human beings, as communities, as nations, as a world, is to be cohesive enough among ourselves to affront those risks. Cooperatively, humans can reach the moon and Mars. And yet, if we only consume and compete individually, we're going to destroy the planet. We're going to destroy any hope of curtailing pandemics. So to me, this has been a huge wake-up call, both the seriousness about climate and the response to COVID and our inability. Tonight, more European countries are going into lockdown just when they thought that they had this pandemic nailed, because guess what? You can't nail it without addressing it across the whole world. So we've got this incredible opportunity, while we've got people's attention, to reset and to say in a deep way, not how do we ensure that everybody has a chicken in the pot, but how do we ensure that people have some sense of belonging and of trust that if they make sacrifices to save the planet or to save their neighbors from COVID, then others will do the same. And that, for me, is why our politicians, from local up to national and global, have to really focus on that. They have to focus on their role, not in being trusted themselves, but in creating the ecosystem in which communities can actually trust each other and then work to solve these challenges.
So we really can create a better world. We have all the capabilities to do so. We have defined the challenges. We have the capability to address those challenges. But where are the obstacles? I mean, what we have learned here in Dubai is from a national point of view, the keywords are reimagine, redesign, and implement. So why can we not implement such a better world? And there's so much anger, so much pessimism. What do we have to do to break out of this mindset, which certainly will not allow us to construct a better world if we are stuck in such a negative attitude? So what is the obstacle? Freike, what do you see as the obstacle?
Yeah, from my perspective, so the tech perspective, it is about bringing the big tech companies to the table and together design and the use of these technologies in an ethical and responsible way. Because if we don't do that, if we just have a public debate where, in fact, most governments don't have enough knowledge to know about these technologies, they're not at the table, then it's just not the optimal solution. So I think we need new platforms where tech companies, governments also are together and formulate the future. And there's also a risk that I see in my field, it's the nationalism. So you don't want to be in a world where every nation says, okay, I'm gonna develop this technology on my own. It's just not the way forward. We need to collaborate.
If you had a wish free to Facebook or to name other companies, what would it be?
If I would, sorry?
If you had a wish free to Facebook, what would it be?
Yes, well, I would set down a framework of regulations that these companies should pledge to, like, this is the way we're going to implement technology over the world, and not that they just do it and we are there to just...
I think it could be expressed in a very short way instead of profit-oriented, human-centered.
Exactly.
Yeah, Dambisa,
Yes.
where do you see, you have such a global perspective,
Yeah.
where do you see the obstacles?
Well, for me, in one word, short-termism. Short-termism is endemic in the private sector. It's endemic in the public policy or the government sector. And I would go as far as to say it's probably quite endemic as individuals. So obviously then becomes a problem in civil society. Why is it a problem? Because virtually every problem that we have identified here, from lack of education, lack of healthcare in the pandemic and beyond, lack of equity, opportunities in jobs, ecological challenges, these are all long-term intergenerational problems. And yet, not only are our public policy makers focused on the short term, but we actually are incentivizing them to focus on the short term. That creates a schism, which creates a fundamental problem where we're not able to address these long-term problems. I will just go very quickly to say, there's a lot of work that has happened in the private sector, and certainly from my perspective of serving on corporate boards, to try and reduce the amount of short-termism that you see in quarterly reporting. So, for example, compensation is now linked to longer-term outcomes, things like climate change outcomes, and you have long-term compensation instead of focused only on an annual basis. But we still don't see that type of essentially incentivized or forced long-term thinking in public policy, and that really damages our ability to see governments that are data-driven, forward-leaning, focused on measured outcomes.
Dambisa, what also has, let's say, increased this notion of short-termism is certainly the pandemic. Absolutely. Because it was a crisis situation, and in a crisis situation, you act very much on a short-term basis. And I think since this crisis or pandemic has now lasted for nearly 2 years, It has had an influence on our general thinking, becoming more ego-centered and more short-determined.
Yes,
Now,
absolutely.
what do you see the NAOCO as the main obstacle?
I think what we are talking about is a clear departure from the current existing social and economic system. So whatever we're trying to do, we always hit this wall of existing incentive system. To me, particularly this world, the current economic system doesn't really appreciate those global commons. Either it's going to be natural capital or social capital or human capital. That one of the challenges is how we are able to create this kind of mechanism to value those global commons into the economic decision making. I see the two obstacles here. One is more like a technical program, because that then how to value, appreciate the natural capital is actually involved a lot of the technical issue that then what is the value of the biodiversity, the value of the land and the soil and others, but it's a technical program, and also to how to set a standard that which everybody agreed. But more maybe fundamentally, there is a huge resistance from the existing system to not to move forward, because we were all as the economic agents are in the dilemma, the prisoner's dilemma. So unless we are able to move together simultaneously and overcome this prisoner's dilemma situation, we will not be able to make a step forward. So incremental thing doesn't really go forward. We need a joint multi-stakeholder platform, maybe important issue by issue, and so that we can overcome those dilemmas issue.
Ilona, what is the most important obstacle for you?
So I see three interlinked challenges, and they're threatening the implementation of social policies based on evidence, but also when you think about the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement targets. And the first one, I would say, toxic polarization that feeds off and creates and disseminates disinformation, misinformation, and of course amplified by social media platforms. This is giving the stage to the rise of a kind of authoritarian populism. There's cracking down on civic space, online and offline, and rights and freedoms. And I would say that this is also allowing for growing extremism, fundamentalism, that it's very dangerous because we see the other camp as an existential threat. So I would say the obstacle is to really overcome this divide, get back to the table based on facts, and be able to build consensus that are based on the truth. And we have to agree, again, what's the truth?
Yeah. Nairi, what would you add?
Well, I would say that we can sit and design a beautiful, smooth to protect you from COVID and find that a lot of the world doesn't trust you enough to take it. We can find green energy sources and then discover communities that will help. So for me, the obstacle is ensuring that people want to come along. And that's why we've got to make government work. And I don't say that just because I'm Dean of a School of Government. I say that because across the world, people don't need to love their government, but they need a government to ensure that other citizens will act in a decent way so that they too can act in a decent way. They need government to be competent and fair and non-self-enriching so that they too can be those things in their communities. And if government doesn't do that, it becomes impossible for them to trust. And without trust, you get fear and anxiety. And with fear and anxiety, people vote for people to break government, not to use it to do great things. And that's what we're seeing around the world. So to me, the biggest obstacle is we can sit, at Davos a few years ago, the Edelman survey showed us that the good news is the elite across the world trust each other more and more. So we can come together and design and do beautiful things together. The bad news is that in every single country they were polling, the majority of people trusted that elite less. So we can lead, but if people aren't following, we're not going to get to where we want to go.
We are coming to an end of this discussion, and of course we could go on and on. But I think we have very well reflected to the discussions which we had over the last 48 hours. Now, to conclude, if you had a call for action, let's assume here you would see all the heads of state, of government at the UN General Assembly sitting and listening to you. What would you tell them in a nutshell? And let's start with you, Freike.
Well, I would ask you to put off or leave behind your personal interest or your interest of your country for a moment and engage in a narrative to build a better future for the world. And with that narrative, with this common vision, then go back and operationalize for yourself. But I think the problem is too much self-interest. Europe first, this first, that first. No, the world first.
Which means we are really living in a world of global interdependence. You cannot, as a nation alone, you can address all those issues. Now, what would be your message, Ilona?
I would say let's empower people, especially let's allow the next generation to flourish. Our young people deserve and need our attention now. For that, we'll need to collaborate, to cooperate. There's a great appetite for collective action. We'll also need to find out what to do with our international cooperation, because it's needed, be in platforms, be in strengthening institutions. Just a fundamental shift is that we're all accountable, be governments, be companies, be ourselves here in the society. So let's not fail our children, our youth. They are the future, but it's I would believe that we're building this together, and we have to make sure they trust us.
Naoko?
Yeah. Each one of us can be and should be a partner of this global platform to take care of global commons. But in order for us to do it, each one of us should step outside our own comfort zone and to meet a non-usual suspect, to create the team and move forward. And it requires a huge courage from all of us, but that, in my view, the only way for us to move towards the flourishing, the future for all.
Nairi?
Dithering. Part of me wants to say, and it's very politically incorrect of me to say in this environment, but just take on Facebook, because it's going to destroy your democracy, it's going to destroy your cohesion if we keep it going now. So you're in government, take it on, partner with other governments to take it on. But actually underneath that is a bigger thing, which is to say, how good is your government at partnering with others? How good is your department at partnering with the department that's right next door to you? How good is your central government at partnering with local government and with the private sector and with civil society? Because I think in that, the ability to partner is actually a huge source of strength for dealing with the challenges we've been discussing.
Tambisa?
So I would say a micro point and a macro point. The micro point is, as government officials, do the right thing. Doing the right thing means looking past the short-term incentives and invest in the future, infrastructure, education, healthcare, these real fundamental challenges. You've got to look through these problems of short-termism and invest in the future. Capital allocation, whether financial or human capital or indeed ecological, must mean you're looking through the short-term incentives. The macro point I would make is that we should not, in our efforts to solve the urgent and important issues, climate, inequality, etc., we should not prejudice people who are in the emerging world. 90% of the world's population lives in the developing world. As we are thinking about climate action and emissions, inequality, globalization, trade, etc., we should make sure that we have a pure global worldview and not just focus on the us versus them.
So change is not happening. I mean, what distinguishes us as a humankind is that we can construct our future, we can influence our future. But what we have heard, we can do so only if we have a long-term view, if we think first of the community and only second of ourselves, and number three, if we think globally. I think that summarizes to a certain extent the discussion which we had, and I would like to thank the panel for their contributions, and again, thanks, because what was expressed here to a certain extent is also a reflection of our discussions of the last 48 hours. So a great thank you for everybody who has participated in this extraordinary dialogue on the great narrative. And finally, a thank again to our hosts in Dubai. And I would add, it was certainly a great choice to be here for this meeting on the great narrative, because quite a number of things which have been said in the panel are practiced in Dubai, as we had an opportunity to experience also during our stay here. So thank you again, and the meeting is closed.
Thank you.